Well, hello again. I hope you had a nice Labor Day. What we're doing right now is, as I told you in the last YouTube, I think it's very helpful if I just simply hit the high notes on the textbook in these YouTubes. That gives us time to talk about the other assigned readings, the PowerPoints, and I've been very, very pleased. I've been getting questions over Blackboard, some really good questions. And we're going to take those up next Monday. I think most of them should be accessible to you, because when you put them up there, you may address them to somebody, like Rashawn addressed one to Eugene. But it's an excellent question, and I think everyone can address it, because it's, as I said, very thorough. So we're going to look at Chapter 2 in the textbook. They're trying to present to us a kind of an overview of everything related to budget and finance, and they kind of do a public-private dichotomy. Great, not a big deal. The one thing you should keep in mind is that the privates tend to be a little bit more flexible, but at the same time they have a lot tougher time when it comes to money, because they don't usually have a state system or sometimes even a regional or county system to fall back on. I want to say something, though, to our colleagues from K-12 and compare it to what goes on at the university and the community college, because all three of us are slightly different. The university presents a budget to its board, and then from on its board it goes on to the state. And they project what their enrollment is going to be for that annual period of time. And they receive funding on the basis of that particular projected enrollment. Now, it's good and bad, because if the enrollment goes down, very seldom, if ever, unless it's a radical decline, they're not asked to give back any money. The community colleges, on the other hand, go with something called full-time equated student. 30 credit hours is a full-time equated student annualized. So you simply take all your generated credit hours and divide them by 30. That's on the credit side of the house. Now, Maryland is one of only, used to be 6, I think it's only 5 now, where non-credit training, development, anything that's not vocational, or excuse me, anything that's not hobby-wise, if it's vocational, we use the same formula. It's a little bit more complex, but it boils down to the same thing. So Maryland is very healthy. Your continuing ed program develops a nice income stream for your institution. Now, for our friends in K-12, that's also a very interesting thing. They get something called an FTDE, full-time day equivalent. That has to do with the number of students who are in school for a fixed period of time. Usually that's from the start of the school day until usually it's the noon hour. That's why you will see, you may see it this semester depending on weather. You may see that if there's a projected severe weather, if they can hold the kids until noon before they release them, then they're allowed to count that as a full-time day, and the students that were in attendance become an FTDE. That's good. Now, a couple of other things. There are restricted funds that come to universities. Morgan, for example, is a major recipient of Title III funds. There's a category in the developing institutions part of DE, that's part of their budget, that is set aside specifically for African American schools. And we get a good chunk of money here at Morgan. There is a separate category that works Title III. Title V goes to the Hispanics, and there is something that filters through the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, for tribal colleges. So you have that. Now, what's good at the K-12 level, and to a lesser extent at the community colleges, for example, Perkins Career and Technology Education funding comes to both community colleges and to K-12. It's based on the number of students you have enrolled in specific programs that have been categorized by the State Department of Career and Tech Ed as career and technology vocational ed programs. Now, obviously, K-12 gets a lot more money than the community colleges, but it is a nice chunk of money. The last year that I coordinated it for a relatively small school, Hagerstown, it was $250,000. Do a lot with that. There are strings, but one thing that is part for both of us, and I will take this up in class, the issue of how much is considered to be maintenance of effort. If you fall back and fall back and fall back, your grant may be cut. The same thing holds true for the K-12 folks with special needs students. They get a formula based on the number of students being served. And that also has, to some extent, the number that you serve are included. Just a quickie of collaboration. I was talking with some folks that between the four-year universities and the community colleges, you have articulation agreements. For Hagerstown, it's 3 schools: Shippensburg in Pennsylvania, Shepherd in West Virginia, and Kaplan, which is a private for-profit. If you complete your associate degree and you choose to enroll in one of those schools, you will get a tuition reduction. It will not be the same as a native student, but it will be less than an out-of-state student. One of the things that goes on between the community colleges and K-12 is something called a shared program, in the sense that students can enroll and receive joint high school and college credit. That is a very good one. We talked a little bit before about the endowment. I'm not going to speak directly to that again because there's so much here. One of the more interesting things, though, when it comes to endowments, they give you a statistic on page 35. It's a good assessment tool. You take the total amount of the endowment and divide it by the number of students, and that tells you how much of an endowment base there is behind each student. Problem: endowments have strings. People might want that endowment to go only to a specific program, the money they gave, or only for a building, or only for a particular activity, or only for an endowed chair, pays the salary or a portion of the salary of a teacher. One of the things that I like very much about the text on page 37, they say, beware of gifts that eat, because sometimes they cost you more than they're actually worth. Grants, one of the questions we ought to look at. I will ask some folks before we have class on Monday. If you submit a grant, particularly through DE and even through some private eleemosynary foundations, you have a question, and that is, what is your approved indirect cost percentage? What does that mean? You ask for $1 million. Then after you put the million in and justify it, you're allowed to add 8% for those unanticipated indirect costs. 8% was what we had at Hagerstown the last time I coordinated a grant. That was pretty good. I've done some work with the American Association of Community Colleges. They put a 40% indirect cost on, which is pretty hard to justify sometimes. But they're a private not-for-profit organization. That is why they do it. Okay, one of the other questions you ask, and we should ask it about, I know a little bit about the community college, but I'm going to have to ask my university colleagues. What about certain kinds of licenses that faculty develop? Or what about patents that faculty come up with that have money values? Or what about copyright on materials that are published that are then sold? What it usually boils down to is a mix that some comes back to the faculty, some stays with the university. It usually depends upon how much of the university material or facilities are invested in getting that patent, getting that copyright, or developing that license. Quickie, and we'll talk more about this in class. How about rental fees? Universities are very interesting. So are K-12 systems. One of the things we talk about is separation of church and state. The way that law is written is primary function is K-12, community college, university. However, if you're not denying any one of those the use of the facility, you can rent it. My favorite one is the community college that serves Tampa. It's the only community college I've ever seen that doesn't have a complaint about parking, because they're right next door to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Stadium. They pay a small fee to the Buccaneers and are allowed to use that parking lot. It's really quite nice. Benefits, just a quick thing on benefits. I was talking to a group today about budgets. Found out that the average increase in healthcare costs to the university, to the college, probably to K-12, we'll ask about that in class, is about 10%. Pension contributions vary. I want to hear about those. There are two kinds. If you're a public institution, we have a very fine system here in Maryland. K-12, community colleges, and universities all belong to the same one. Gives you a better corpus. You get more money for your investments. If you plan to be highly mobile, TIAA CREF, which is a large national thing, works very well. Let's talk about the first cut syndrome, and I'll probably end it on this note. It has to do with what are the things that are constantly cut first. They usually include professional development for staff and faculty and travel money. That's sad because those are the things that are most necessary. We'll talk a little bit also about entertainment issues when we're together next Monday. See you then. Hope you find these useful.